Hello and welcome to another episode of Frame and Reference. I'm your host, Kenny McMillan, and today I'm talking with Pete Chatmon, who directed an episode of this season, the second season of The Flight Attendant. We actually have another director of The Flight Attendant coming up as well, so we got a big Flight Attendant rip. Pete's rad. This conversation was very cool because I don't tend to talk to a lot of directors, but like I said at the beginning of this season of Frame and Reference, I was going to welcome the challenge. And so me and Pete really got to talk a lot about, I guess, the artistic psychology of filmmaking, if that makes any sense. It's just a very arty, I suppose, a little headier podcast, which was a lot of fun. It took me a minute it was kind of funny because I was a little tired, so it took me a minute to get there, but it was something I'd been thinking about a lot, or just a series of things that I'd been thinking about a lot. So we got on a nice little rip there, and I think we had some fun. Also, Pete has a podcast similar to this one called Let's Shoot with Pete Chatmon, and he just recently interviewed Kayla Cuoco. So you get even more Flight Attendant if you haven't seen it. What else? You can vote for The Flight Attendant if you're an Emmy voter. And yeah, so that's that. I'll leave you to it. It's a real fun one. Like I said, very artsy and really cool. And Pete's rad, and you guys are rad. So I'll let you get to it. And so here you go. This is my conversation with Pete Chatmon. So the way that we actually usually start the podcast is just by asking about how you got into filmmaking. Obviously, usually cinematography, but like, were you always a creative person? Were you kind of like a theater school kind of kid, or was it, did you come to it later in life?
Well, first, Kenny, thanks for having me on the podcast, man. It's an honor. I appreciate it. And, I first got into filmmaking, storytelling. I'll never claim to be a cinematographer, but I have shot things. But I picked it up in 11th grade in high school. We were fortunate in the community I lived in. We had a Super 8 filmmaking course. We had a black and white photography course, both of which we developed our own film in the class. And then we had the local public access TV station or TV studio in the high school.
Oh, wow.
And so I got to try in 11th grade, and I just gravitated toward it, coupled with having seen Do the Right Thing and kind of getting a little bit of an early exposure to, I hate the pretentiousness of it, but like films versus movies, you know what I mean?
Yeah. And I don't think that's pretentious anymore. I think that's nowadays, especially, that's an important distinction.
Yeah.
And we can get into that, but sorry.
Yeah, no. I mean, I guess you're right. It has evolved over time, but I came up watching, Koyaanisqatsi on Laserdisc, you know what I mean? So like, I got a particular sensibility.
Yeah.
Yeah, man, like I remember I had an assignment where it was pretty much just take the camera out and shoot something. And I had my girlfriend at the time, she was my actor all the time. And I had her come down from the train platform in South Orange, New Jersey, where I grew up. And then, so it was like she got off the train and then she came down the platform and picked up a payphone. So I'm dating myself. And I had her get off the train, go through the door toward the steps. And then I did like this tilt down off of the Bell Atlantic sign as she walked up to the phone. And the teacher gave me such accolades on like the condensing of time. And I don't even know why I was like, that's the way to do it. Because like most everybody else would have been like, hand on the doorknob, walks down 24 stairs, walks through the lobby, comes outside the other door. You know what I mean? It would have been like a
shot of the feet walking.
Shot of the feet walking. Yeah. So that
homeless person.
Yeah, that little bit of like, that was a good choice kind of made me say, oh, word, and I never stopped.
Yeah, it's that early. I went to a New York Film Academy in LA, before I went to college, and they had this whole list of rules about what you could and couldn't shoot, and none of it was content based. It was all like no single red rose, no briefcase full of cocaine, no homeless people. No, you know, it was just all these things that they had seen 1,000 times. They're like, no, none of that montaging of like, just fucking put all 19 shots into one shot. You don't need to explain this. I just saw Jurassic World and they did not follow those rules. A lot of close-up unnecessary feet. You can choose to if you want. You know, AMC A-list, go for it.
There you go. All right.
Talk to me about your experience in the darkroom, because everyone who's worked with photographic film, I mean, developing your own Super 8 is definitely interesting, but the sort of meditative experience in the darkroom, did you really gravitate towards that, or was that kind of an obstacle to getting the final image?
I gravitated toward it. I thought, like, you know, there's a connection to what there's a heightened connection to what you're doing, because you are now a cog in its delivery. You know what I'm saying? And so if you do it wrong, like, it's gonna be wrong. So it kind of so there's that part of it. And then it also, like, when you do come out of the lab and you're like, oh, this is totally underexposed, like, you're going to be listening to why, you know what I mean? Right. Because I do think there's this thing that I've noticed, because I taught at NYU for years as well, like, where when it became possible to just hit record and have 4K pristine footage, and then also the ability to time it later. And you know, I mean, I feel like a lot of the craft kind of evaporated in the sense of understanding what's happening. And I think I've gotten tangential, but I think that's kind of that's
this podcast.
You know, I think that to me is the biggest thing. Like as a director, when I talk to folks, I'm like, if you understand what everybody's doing, then you really can become a storyteller. And then you also can avoid being like railroaded into someone else's either taste or inexperience. Because there's a lot of times people will tell you, oh, you can't shoot that like that. And I'll be like, I shot some shit like that last week. It fucking works, man. You know what I mean? And matter of like, I actually just did that in a show, and the script supervisor was like, I don't think that's gonna work. I was like, I literally did this in another episode of TV and it was dope. It's gonna it may make you uneasy, but it works. So I love being connected to the not tactical, but
tactility.
The tactility. You know what I mean? I like that, because I think that's how it should be.
Yeah, that risk aversion seems to be a lot more prevalent now in filmmaking. You know, whether it be the script supervisor or probably producers, they all seem to. And this goes, like, I don't really shoot much narrative yet, but even, you know, down to commercials and dumb shit you might shoot for the internet, for companies, they all have this idea of what they want, and it's usually 3 different things that they've seen elsewhere that don't jive, and then they're like, we need all of that here, and you're like, you've asked for 3 things, and they're like, I do it, and then they get it back and they're like, why does this look boring? Right. Like, because you safetied the hell out of it. Like, it's too dark.
Yeah. You're not lying.
Have you? Thank you, calendar. Have you noticed in your line of work, because you've had your hand in quite a lot of really great television recently, and I was wondering if what those kind of those risk averse or maybe not conversations have been like. Does it feel like, because from the outside it does seem like television especially is starting to become much more interesting. And I'm wondering if those conversations are still happening, or is there just like kind of a better meeting at the beginning of what you're all going for, or kind of like what's that behind the scenes look like for you guys these days?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, like, it's the thing for directors who enter television from other mediums. There's got to be a pivot in understanding the nature of television, right? Which is like, like, I'm developing things, right? And like, in 2 2 years when this thing is going to production, I am not looking for some director to tell me how it needs to be shot, because I figured that out 2 years ago. You know what I mean? Right. And so when I like learning that and embracing that is kind of freeing. So a lot of times, like, I just study to make sure I understand what the show is. And then so that's kind of first. Then I try and put myself or find myself in the story. So I'm not just some kind of hired hand. Like, there's got to be something that I can connect to. And I remember when I was doing more branded content work, I don't know where I saw this, but George Stephanopoulos,
Sure.
Formerly of the Clinton White House in the cabinet, was like talking about doing all these interviews and these kind of different types of pieces on Good Morning America. And he was like, I got to just find one thing I'm really interested in everybody I talk to. And then I can be engaged. And so, for TV, it's like, if I'm on a show, or if I get an episode of a show that's kind of like, this is our, kind of, I don't want to say standard, because that's minimized, but this is like what people expect of our show. And it could be, pretty straightforward. Then I'm going to give you a pretty straightforward episode. Yeah. You know what I mean? But if I get an episode that's calling on me to do more creative things, then I'm going to go to town. And I'm always going to try and push a little bit to see how much, new creative language the episode can withstand. But I'm always going to know, like, look, if they don't like this, and or they don't want this, cool. And so a lot of times I'll cover myself. So like, I think
right.
about like, I did 2 episodes of Love Life last summer. And in the first episode I did, which was episode 2, at the end of it, I was like, man, this is like, this is just for me. But I asked William Jackson Harper if he would just look at the lens, just spike the lens, go right into the camera as I do this slow push, but like wait about 3 beats and then do it. And I snuck it in. No one knew I did it. I put it in my cut and it made it to air. You know what I mean? So like, but they had 4 takes of, not breaking the fourth wall. Yeah.
Yeah. There's that Spike Lee influence too.
Yeah.
Dude, they made us watch Do the Right Thing like every other class at Arizona State. That was like, for some reason, that was the one.
It's really, it holds up, man. It holds up.
And you know what's funny? It's probably I used to complain about that film. I used to like, fuck, because they made us watch it a bunch of times. But I realized the reason that I was mainly complaining at first was because I didn't get it. The first 2 times I saw it, didn't get it. I was just like, everyone's angry. No one's having a good time. Like, I hate this. But I was coming from my upbringing was very much more in movies, as you said, Men in Black, your Matrix, your Fight Club. I guess you could argue either way, but like, stuff like that was a little more fantasy. I was much more in the fantasy realm. So a movie about a city kind of imploding in on itself, or a neighbor, a neighborhood or whatever. I was just like, this hurts. This hurts in here. I don't.
What is this?
Yeah. So very eye opening there. Actually, that is well. First of all, I did want to ask when you were saying about how much creativity can an episode withstand or whatever. Right. When you're making any television, is there sort of a conscious, like, this is what people want, or are you always going with what you personally like or enjoy, or your sensibilities? Is there a balance there, or do you kind of ignore the outside influence, as it were? What's trending, maybe? That's
interesting, man. I feel like the show dictates that to me. Like, there are definitely shows where there's something topical about this, something timely. And with that blueprint of the script and the DNA of the show, I might lean toward what you're talking about a little bit more. I really do think, though, it's like, I've been fortunate to do a good job on all the shows I get hired to do. And then over time, I'm getting hired because I'm very proactive. I go after the shows that I want to direct. So like, if you have a show that I like, I'm gonna have my reps reach out and be like, Pete likes your show. You know what I mean? Like, can he have a meeting? And so over these last 5-6 years, now it's like almost every year, it's almost becoming 75-85% of like all shows that I went after. So in this weird way, I'm now kind of getting shows that are in my sensibility pocket. So the reality of like having to really reverse engineer or kind of govern myself is not as high, because it's more things that like I would have loved to have been involved with from the inception, like Flight Attendant. Like I love that show, and when that came through, I was like, oh, this is like, A, I'm happy as hell to be here. B, I love this script, and like C, you want me to go crazy with the camera and the editing? Like, okay, you know what I mean? Like, so it works out.
Yeah, that show. I remember my girlfriend was watching it. She's definitely the like background show person. So there's always something on, so I kind of don't pay attention to it. But then I walked out in my office and she's just like paying close attention, closer than average. And I was like, huh. Right. So I walked over there and it was the first season of Flight Attendant. And I was like, what's this? And then cut to like 3 hours later, we're both like about halfway through the season.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a fun one, man.
Yeah, it's great. It's great.
When you're working on a show that's not only in its second season, but I think you did one episode of the show? I
did one episode, right.
Yeah. What are those conversations like with, is it primarily the showrunners that you're talking to that keep everything sort of consistent and coherent? Are you talking with the other directors or like maybe even the actors to kind of guide you into not only adding your flair, but like make sure it doesn't look like a montage of music videos?
Right. So there's, there's always a show. Well, and there's always a showrunner or writer EP. And that person is kind of like your guiding light for what the show is doing, has done, and is trying to do, right? Because like if you hop into, something that's not, something that's not necessarily episodic and maybe is more serialized, then like you may not know for sure like that this one scene is like an alley-oop for 2 episodes from now, right? So like they're like, hey, like that scene is actually super important. Like, it's kind of inferred, maybe there's subtext, but they're like, hey, here's what's going to happen. So they're really helpful in that. A lot of these 1-hour shows have producing directors. And so they're also an executive producer or a co-EP, but they're there to really help with the hiring of the directors. So to kind of keep, maintain the integrity of that. And then also prep the directors. So I just did that on a show from like January to May. And so like, it was, for me, the most important part was like, all right, for your 7 days of prep, I'm in every meeting with you. I'm answering every question with you or for you. I'm giving you a download of what the cast and crew is like, what to look out for, maybe any kind of, danger zones that might arise.
Some friction in there.
Some friction, you know what I mean? And then when we get to set, I try and back away and then I prep with the next director, because ideally I've set you up for success. So, in the Flight Attendant's case, the showrunner was Steve Yockey and Natalie Chaidez. They were co-show running. And then the producing director was Silver Tree. And it's such a, people, once you find the people you like to collaborate with, you kind of keep going back to the well because you know that you can breathe easy. So like in that case, I had done 2 episodes of You, where Silver was the producing director. So then that kind of led to this. And then, now it's going to lead to Fatal Attraction. They're doing a reboot of that. So, that's how you kind of have the the guardrails, if I may. And from there, your department heads are really important because they know what the showrunner and the producing director are looking for. And so, there are so many things that are kind of set up for you by the time you arrive. Like locations have been scouted and maybe they whittled 10 down to 3, and they know which ones they want to use, but like they're going to let you decide. Or they're gonna like kind of be like, hey, that what do you think about that one? And so you're kind of reading the room and gathering like, well, is it a budget thing for that location that makes it harder to achieve something else in the episode? And you're making all these decisions, but they give you all of the room in the playground that you need to start making directorial decisions that are in line with your vision.
Yeah, that kind of makes me think of a little bit of what we were talking about a minute ago, about when you were saying earlier on in your career, you had less room to have input. And I was wondering if you had any sort of tips for anyone who is currently at that point in their career where they're showing up as a hired gun and aren't, maybe those 3 locations, they're not choosing, you're showing up to really just kind of guide the crew around, make sure someone hits the record button, etc. How do you do that without feeling, offended every time?
I think it's like embrace it. You know what I mean? Like whether you're a chef or an architect, like every time you do the job, like you're gonna improve somewhere. And so like if I'm doing a show that's pretty locked in on what it is, then I might say, okay, I'm going to work on blocking this episode. I'm going to really challenge myself on blocking. You know what I mean? Or I'm going to try and, and I think this is a big part of the job. Like I try and come into the episode and say like, all right, it's different on like a first or second season show than like a season 10 show. Sure. But, I'm like, maybe folks are here and they've kind of, I don't want to say fallen into a rut, but they're not as excited as they were when they
less novelty.
Yeah. Less not, like, can I come in and kind of reinvigorate that excitement and all of those, remind them of those reasons in a kind of Jedi mind trick way of like why they loved being here. And, can we get the best, like, can I make my episode better than the ones before and after? You know what I mean? Because like we just lock in and find the vibe, because the vibe is a huge part of it. Like if people are tired or angry or feeling overworked and unappreciated, like they stop offering ideas,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like there's all these things that begin to make like the baseline of a good episode just go down a little bit. And over the course of, 20 to 50 scenes, it's a death by 1,000 cuts. So I think the short of it all is like, I think embrace whatever episode you get, because I've done shows where I kind of like, maybe it was the first one and they're like, okay, we'll hire Pete. You know what I mean? And I get like,
he's available.
He's available. We need, like in the world of like, to compare it to music, right? It's like, okay, this is the song about the girl, right? And so like, it's a pretty standard beat, but like, maybe we'll release it to radio, maybe not, but I'm on the album. But then they're like, oh, you did great with that. We need a summer smash. And now we want you to do that on the next album. And you're only going to graduate to that if they know that you understand what they're trying to do and they're not trying to impose your vision in a way that doesn't have a handshake with what they decided they were going to be doing years before you arrived.
That brings up an excellent, well, I don't know if what I'm about to say is excellent, but it brings up something interesting, which is I was talking to a professor from college a few weeks ago, which for me was about 10 years ago I graduated. And when we were in school, the 5D came out my sophomore year. So we were still aiming at film, and we were all, there was no other option. Today, you know, if this is your thing, you can make a ton of money on YouTube doing whatever you want, you know, or you can just create for yourself. But for us, it was like, that's the industry we want to go. It was an industry. And so this idea of getting out of school and just being a DP, I've graduated and now I'm a DP, did not exist, right? We were like, well, we got to find it in, you know, where are we going to PA? And my professor was saying that all these kids are getting out of school, and that element seems to be that element of starting somewhere and proving yourself and working your way. They're like, that's, you know, this is bullshit. I put in my time. Right. These gatekeepers are
I'm 20.
Yeah. I'm 20 and hot. Yeah. The idea that there are gatekeepers is like offensive. But I've noted that that's the only, that will never change. You do need to go through and prove that you know what you're doing. No one's going to spend $1 million on you just because you, you know, had a great interview.
Right. Right. And, you know, and you also need that attitude, right? Because like, I feel like, I mean, I had that same attitude, you know, for years.
I did too. Yep.
And I still have it when I do stuff now. Like, you know, I've been interviewing for different like kind of high action shows, and they're like, oh, you haven't done that before. And I'm like, you're going to see one day I'm going to kill that shit. And you're going to be like, oh, you're the action guy. You know what I mean? Like, because every year I try and get into a new genre because I know there's always going to be the thing that they think you can't do. But like, I need to have that attitude. That 20-year-old needs to have that attitude. But the reality of it is the folks on the other side of the table have zero connection to your self-belief. You know what I mean? Right. Like they need to see something, and you need to find some way through your own means to create the thing for them to see. And that's like, you know, over a long enough timeline, you know, you get to that point, and then, you know, either those people seek you out, or the people that you've been toiling with, you know, trying to get there, you know, like you're out here trying to be a DP, and then that other person becomes a producer, you know, and then they're like, hey, Kenny, come shoot this thing. And, you know, I saw it a lot. Like, you know, one of the folks that I went to NYU with and graduated with was Reed Morano. And she was shooting everybody's stuff, you know, like had a 24p, you know, Canon camera or Panasonic or whatever, and, you know, shooting docs and whatever she could. And then it became indie films, and then it was directing films as well. And it's like, but that's like that's a 20 year grind, you know,
right.
That we all want to think we can, you know, speed through, but the reality of it is it's very likely you're going to need at least a year before it pops open.
I've noticed at least for me, it seems to be my whole life has been on 4-year intervals. And when I was about 28, I was just like, all right, I can chill the fuck out, like because I'd get anxious, you know, oh, it's not happening, and I'm worried about something that I started trying to do like 6 months prior.
Right.
I'm failing, you know.
Right.
But I think what you're talking about is like kind of a humble confidence, you know, because if you don't believe in yourself, no one's going to believe in you. But you also have to understand that like you know, I know that I'm talented enough to shoot a nice commercial or whatever, you know, maybe probably a narrative as well. But also, if someone was like, "Hey, Kenny, you're gonna shoot the next flight attendant episode," I would fucking die. Like, no, because I don't have that experience. Like, I don't know, I haven't hit that level yet. You know, there's stepping stones that now later in life I'm like, I would rather hit the stepping stones before just getting handed a feature.
But I would say the stones are not as far apart as we think, because because I shadowed on a bunch of shows, and you know, the takeaway that I always say to people is I didn't see any geniuses. You know what I mean? Like I was just watching people who had a precise method, you know, had a great temperament, Some could have probably been psychologists, you know what I mean? Because how they were managing all the personalities. And then I'm like, okay, so that's the job, like obviously the shots and the blocking and all that is the job too. But like the best blocking in the world won't happen if you can't deal with people, So, I always marvel at like, as with anything, it's really once you know the mechanics of it, and that's probably the biggest gap, because when you graduate from school, you think it's just the process, you know what I mean? But like when you peep the mechanics, you're like, oh, I can do that. Or, it's like, oh, it's just dribble between my legs and jab and then step back and then I shoot. Okay, I could practice that and do that. And now, I'm Steph Curry.
Yeah. Yep. That's how it works.
That's how it goes.
Yeah. 4 rings, whatever. That actually kind of brings up another question I was going to ask, which was, talk to me about the importance of the crew that you hire, mm-hmm. and what not each individual person does, but sort of managing that team, and what do you look for in a great crew member, and what are you avoiding?
So I'll answer that on 2 levels. Like if I'm doing a film or doing a commercial, then I've got a hand in the selection of that crew more likely than not. If it's a TV show, I'm working with the crew that works on the show. So it's almost like, being elected president and keeping the cabinet of the so you really have to know how to like be a good guest while also being a good leader. Now, when you get into, what do you look for? I mean, first I want to know that we're on the same page with the story and that you have some connection to it, and just on an emotional level. And then that would be like A, and then B, like you have a sensibility and taste that understands how this should be attempted to be communicated. And I say attempted because we prep and we plan and then we shoot and it's different, know? So, and then lastly, like, do you have the skill set to do what you're talking about? Right. Because, a lot of times in my early times, man, I remember I did a short film and these folks told me they could edit the behind the scenes, and then they gave me a cut and I was like, did you just buy this fucking Final Cut Pro? And they were like, yeah, it's our first. I was like, oh shit. So now I'm like in the editing room, like, yo, cut that, do that. So those would be the 3 things. And I think, I've learned to also look at how certain department heads engage, because the dynamic between, let's say, a UPM line producer and a DP just fundamentally is contentious, because I want more equipment and you want less money spent. And so just every time we see each other, it's going to be, I want what you don't want me to have. And so I watch for those kind of dynamics too, because if it's contentious from the beginning, it's only going to get worse with long hours, difficult days, and challenging, schedules.
Right. I actually, something that's brought to mind is I was on a shoot a couple weeks ago, and the director would constantly throw in, we were shooting a commercial and there was it was like legally we needed to shoot a lot of alts for the lawyers to look at and go, okay, this one, that one, whatever, for verbiage. And he kept throwing in these random alts that were like putting the timeline back, and the AD was getting pissed off. And then at one point he throws in like a stunt, like his buddy was on the shoot and he goes, I'm going to throw the stunt in. And then so all of us were like, hold on, wait. And so we're all like, why are we doing that? Why is he doing this? And he turns around, the director turns around to the AD and looks at him and goes, I don't need any questions from you guys. And then turns around and gets back to it. And we're like, okay, got it.
Right.
The AD leans over to me and he goes, I don't think he knows what my job is.
Right.
I would like to ask him if he knows what I'm supposed to be doing here.
Right. And then I guess that, the petty reply is, well, I guess we won't be supplying any answers to you, you know, because there's going to be a time when you're going to turn around and say, hey, how do we get out of this? Or I need that. And yeah,
it's
not collaborative.
No. And that was the other thing too, is like, it was supposed to be like a funny spot, you know, it wasn't like the set was pretty light and he was taking it very seriously. But I think I get the feeling it was just like first larger gig.
Yeah.
Well, so I was a little stressed out.
Yeah. But that ain't going to help.
No. Are there any resources were you always kind of naturally charismatic in team playing, or did you have to find some resources to help, teach you how to deal with people in that way?
You know, well, I hope I'm charismatic, you know, but, you know, I think when I first picked up the camera, you know, it was not only shooting all the time, I was stealing the books, you know, from my high school teacher. Some of them I actually still have, which is crazy, like, I guess. And I think he knew, and I think he appreciated that I was so like enamored. But, you know, I read Sidney Lumet's Making Movies, like, you know what I mean? Like,
that was me in high school, buddy.
Exactly. Like once I was like, you know, okay, I like this. I want to do this. I want to go to NYU. Like, I was like, well, what are the things, you know? Well, I can watch, I can read. What can I read, you know? So I read that book, you know, quick tangent. I remember Entertainment Weekly did the 50 greatest directors and their 100 best films, right? And so for each director, it had. I
thought you meant per director. I was like, what the fuck?
that's a big
weird list. Yeah,
but it was like it had like so you know what it was kind of like they had the movie and they had the film, right? Mm-hmm. So like you could see the one that everybody's gonna know, and then here's the one that like, you know, that was the cult favorite, or like the real film enthusiast is gonna know about it. And I got a credit card at Macy's, first credit card, so I could get a VCR, so I could go to Blockbuster and Kim's Video, Underground Video, and rent all these fucking VHS tapes. And so the short of it is that once I was like, I want to do this, I wanted to understand like the craft, the psychology, the technique, and over again, reading resources like that, or like right here, I have a Do the Right Thing book that Spike signed right here, you know.
Oh, nice.
Like, you know, it was just, I wanted to understand what the demands of the job were. And another great book I read was 50 directors talk about the first like films that they made or whatever. And, you know, it was just cathartic for me, but it was also kind of giving me a little bit of a like ingredient list of like, okay, it's going to be crazy. You gotta be kind of physically in shape to get through production, you know, like you have to be mentally in shape. You have to collaborate with people. You know what I mean? Like, it's just not an art of one. And if you, and you are also working with people who are much better at their job than you are, but you want them to do with their talent what you do if you had it. You know what I mean? So it's like this weird thing of like, you know, you almost, as you get older and even as you have kids, like you kind of learn like, I have to create an environment for people to be their most creative and their most collaborative. And whatever it takes to get that little cocktail is directing. And that shit changes day to day. It changes show to show, you know, but like you kind of have to always have your finger on the pulse and figure out what you might need to add to make sure you're staying on track. And so even kind of going back to your earlier question, like, oh, if you get a show or an episode that's kind of straightforward, like what I just said is the job though, right? So like an opportunity to hone that craft, you know, is only going to prepare you for the big blockbuster finale episode, or, you know, when somebody comes and says, we want you to do a Marvel movie, it'll be because you can do that, not because you can impose like, you know, movie moves or tracking shots or fucking, you know, montage editing. You know what I mean? Like,
because you shot in 8K. Oh, we shot it on Monstro. You should shoot Eternals.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
You know, you're talking about watching all these movies, and we touched on it with the movie versus film thing. But I kind of wanted to get your angle on. I had this thought recently that I was kind of wishing, selfishly and stupidly, that we could make films only for people who understood film. Because I'm kind of sick of, like, it's always online. I don't think I ever have these conversations with actual people, but like, it's people who don't get filmmaking or don't get like storytelling. Like, media literacy is at an all-time low. So you just get these bonehead takes about great films. Sometimes they're bad films, but whatever. And they're like, I hated it. That's actually a key one. They don't say they didn't like it. They say it was bad.
Right.
And then you have to sit there and go, no, it's not. The thing you dislike is fine, but it's not bad because of that. It's you just don't like it because you don't understand storytelling.
Right.
Like
right.
the way it was described that I thought was kind of on point was like, for some reason now people will only accept the optimum, like a character doing the optimum thing and not the human thing.
As far as like by optimum being like, this is like, if everyone were looking, this is the best choice to make, kind of thing. Like,
and also what I guess if every character has 20/20, you know, not hindsight but current sight.
Right.
You know, why would you do that? That's stupid. That doesn't make any sense. And it's like, well, because they're human. A lot of times if you look at these older films, a lot of people are making bad choices. That's kind of the point.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, you know, such an interesting thing, right? You know, without answering the question, I think it's why TV has become, you know, the go-to for interesting storytelling, right? Because I think Obama said this. He was like, TV, like these shows are like the new novel, right?
Right.
Because people don't read anymore read like they used to. And so, I mean, even if like half these shows are like, it's not an episode, it's chapter 2, chapter 3, right? So like this idea of like the best way to get into someone else's shoes is through an episode of television. And because films are doing exactly what you're saying more often than not, like kind of with that optimum character choice, you know, people who want to deal with flawed characters, creatives have kind of left and flocked to the places where they could do that, which has been streaming or premium cable or whatever. So yeah, you're right. But you know, the funny thing about it is that I wonder what was I watching? I feel like I saw a clip of James Gray. Who directed The Yards, right?
That I wouldn't know. I can do it.
I think it's James Gray. I might be messing that up, but he was talking about, you know, the big mistake of getting rid of James Gray, yeah. Getting rid of all these different kind of mini majors that were like the art house wings of like of major studios, and really deciding not to make as much kind of, you know, Oscar fare. And they're like, it's, you know, it's systematically dumbing down the audience, you know, because you get into a real conversation of like puppetry and elitism perhaps, but like I wonder, you know, there's an argument, let's say that, you know, people don't know what they want, right? Because what people are watching, someone decided they would watch. So if you were to decide that, you know, this is the way that we want, these are the things we want to promote or sell or create, then people would shift. Just like, you know, prior to social media, people weren't saying, I'm clamoring for fake news. You know,
Right.
what I'm looking for is an infinite scroll of bullshit. Like
Yeah. I want to be angry 24/7.
Nobody was saying that. Like people say, okay, so if that exists and people know, and maybe that's just lower hanging fruit, you know, what Gray was saying, like, well, there is a higher hanging fruit. You know what I mean? And it deserves exercise as well. You know, it needs to be fed as well.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, like, not only, so I completely agree that I think if you put good stuff in front of people and take away the option to watch bad stuff, they'll still watch it, and then they will slowly become educated on like what's good, and they'll have better opinions. And because that's what I was saying earlier, like it was a selfish and dumb thought, like why can't we make movies for people who like movies? And it's like, that's shortcutting the hard part, which is actually changing an industry to value maybe not making $1 billion this month.
Right.
You know,
Right.
Like the Criterion channel is very available on streaming. You know, you don't even got to buy the Blu-rays, but no one's going to go on there and choose Double Indemnity because they don't know what it is. You know, they know Jurassic World. I love how I just saw Jurassic World too, and I'm talking about this. But yeah, I've been thinking. The only reason I asked is because I have been thinking about it a lot recently. Like, how do we build in that media literacy or that love of cinema? You know, everyone like jumping on Scorsese's throat for him like trying to champion original, like let's say OG cinema or whatever. I'm like, get off his back. Like the man is trying to save an art form. Like there's a difference between the art and the entertainment. Just because they're both visual mediums doesn't mean they're the same thing, you know?
Right.
So
I mean, the other argument though, and you know, I'm somewhat devil's advocating here, but like, you know, all things evolve, all things change, all things, you know, there's a cycle to everything, you know, like, I look at my niece wearing the things that I was dying to get rid of my closet in the 90s, you know, and it's like, wow,
the 90s are back.
The 90s are back, right? Like you guys are making a bad choice. But you know, like what happens over time? You know, like I was watching or listening to this podcast called the Fall of Civilizations, and very light fare. And one thing they talked about though was like the evolution of food. And so if you go back to, you know, early like Mesopotamia, you know, or anywhere like at the dawn of civilization, like, you know, bananas were not bananas. They were this different thing that were hardly edible. And people would get the 2 edible ones out of 1,000. And then over thousands of years, they became edible bananas. And same with grains and you know, and rice and all these things. And like, you know, what will be the positive evolution of like this time that's happening now? I don't know. I can't predict it, but maybe there'll be a new genre that emerges, or there's more fluency in because that's a new thing, right? Like the genre mixing is really the thing, because there's nothing new left to do, right?
I like a good I love a genre film, and so I love, you know, Everything Everywhere is a great example of just everything in the kitchen sink getting thrown at a film,
right? And that's because those filmmakers have seen so much and are like, fuck it, I can do whatever I want. So like maybe at the end of the day, like we're just where we are overexposed or hyper aware of all the noise. But then there are these other things that are kind of carving and cutting through here and there that, you know, I don't know. Maybe I'm just being trying to be hopeful here.
No, I agree. Cause like they made that joint for 15 million. Like, I think that was maybe the giant bell that got rung that maybe hopefully is telling, well, there's only 3 companies that own all media now, but that's a different story. But maybe it's telling one of those 3 that we don't need to tentpole everything. You know,
Right.
we can give 15, 25 mil to someone and maybe give us something interesting that's a little closer to the ground. Although that film is insane, but the heart of that story is pretty close to the ground. You know, just mother, her daughter, and her father. But that's my hopefulness, is like films like that are going to start to be a lot more prevalent and in people's, because everyone loved that film.
Yeah.
I haven't heard one person say, it wasn't for me, you know?
Yeah.
So I think that kind of stuff's helping. But I did want to ask, because you brought it up twice, like what was Do the Right Thing for you? Was that it's kind of a seminal film, or did it just come up twice in this conversation, or like was it the New York connection that drew you to that? Or
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was. First, it was the first time I had watched something and really saw elements of my life and my psyche reflecting back to me. So that was kind of like, you know what I mean? And like, I say this all the time, and I wrote about it in my book. I'm like, you know, when Giancarlo Esposito's Bugging Out character got his Jordan scuffed, and like that was like a scene and a moment and a like plot point. I was like, yo, I know that. And it does this little thing where you're like, well, okay, well, maybe I can like tell stories too. Like a little tiny thing like that. So that was it. That was like the main thing. And then just you know, as I dissected the film and kind of looked at all of the crafty storytelling, in my opinion, where it felt like you're meandering through a day, but nothing was frivolous. You know what I mean? Like everything had a point. Like, you know, the introductions of every character told you something about the end of the film. The economy of it, you know, was very, you know, that spoke to me as well, because I knew that I'd be stepping into this career without means, you know? So it's like, oh, you can do something about a single block in your town. Okay. Let me, you know, and I think that spoke to a lot of folks. I mean, if you look at, you know, Kevin Smith, you know, and putting Red Bank, New Jersey on the map in a particular way, like, it was a North Star in many regards.
Yeah, no, Clerks for me was well, I didn't get to Clerks first. I hit I guess it was Dogma first, and then worked my way back. But yeah, that was definitely for, I think anyone who was in film school in the 90s and early 2000s got like a big shot of Kevin Smith, Spike Lee, Spike Jonze, you know, Michel Soderbergh, yeah. Do you see anyone these days that kind of reminds you of that, or has echoes of that, of those filmmakers?
Wow. Yeah. Like new directors?
Yeah. Or even people who are kind of hitting right now, because all those folks are like established, but, you know, maybe have started to enjoy light retirement, you know.
Retirement light.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny, man. Like, I will tell you, I don't really watch a lot of movies anymore. I don't. Like, I've gone to the Apple TV and gone to like I've tried to watch things. I'm like, nah, you know. And it's this weird thing, right? Where like it's either, you know, I think the last movie that I sought out was probably Bond, because I love the James Bond movies, and I was like, I'm watching that, you know. But then it's just like either that, or it's something that's a little like that's kind of super small and specific in a way that for some reason, I guess, has been decided, well, this will be the kind of film we make. So it'll be some small period piece, or I don't know, something that I found myself going immediately to Netflix, Hulu, and, you know, HBO Max, Amazon Prime, and seeing what are the new shows.
Yeah. Well, and the shows are like we were saying, like shows are the new hotness, you know, like there are, that is interesting though. Cause we're kind of dancing around the same issue, which is like, we either go see your James Bond, your Jurassic Park, or it's a show. but I think it kind of, that almost speaks to what we were saying, which is like everything in the middle doesn't exist anyway. So we don't have an option. I mean, last night I went on a tear just watching random stuff. Like when my girlfriend's gone for the week, so I always like, I'm like, this is my time. So I end up watching so I watched like The Day the Earth Stood Still, the Keanu Reeves version. I watched oh shit, what was it? It was this is the problem. I don't even remember what I saw, but I watched like 4 movies in a row that were all just like that. War of the Worlds. You know, I was just like seeking out weird stuff. Oh, Ender's Game. Just stuff like that. Cause I don't know why, but I was like, let's, that was my, candy for the evening or whatever. Yeah. And I wouldn't say a lot of those, Ender's Game's pretty good, but like, I wouldn't say that Day the Earth Stood Still is like high cinema or whatever, but you just sit there and you're like, yeah, but I don't even see that film really getting made today. So that had no, end to that thought. That was just what was happening.
It's a thought. Yeah, no, it's an interesting time, and hopefully there'll be some, you know what I'll say, and this is really my hope, and it's really a specific hope for myself. But I feel like, you know, I talk often about genre blending is the new thing, because audiences can finally see something that challenges their idea of story and narrative, while giving them, you know, you have to be very artful in how you construct a hybrid genre piece, right? But like you're giving them something that they're familiar enough with to go on the journey, and then you are now making the decisions about, well, which, you know, kind of archetypal structural points are am I going to lean into or remove? And when I think about the things that I want to do, you know, with Black characters, and putting them into films like that, and read and going directly at a lot of these topics that are often, you know, addressed either tangentially or addressed in an anthropological way. Like, I think that's an exciting new place for me that I think that audiences are kind of, perhaps they don't know it, but are waiting for something of that nature. You know, I was watching the last season of Atlanta with my wife, and I was like, man, this is just like
one of the best shows ever.
It's just, I'm like, man, they're really doing whatever they want, you know, and not just to be doing whatever, but to be making a statement, and it's super creative, and it's critically, you know, awarded. I don't know, man, I'm kind of rambling myself, but I think, you know, a lot of times when things are in flux, things are also kind of hardening at the same time, and you don't know it, right? Yeah. So like when all those mini majors were shutting down in the late aughts, you know, we were pivoting to a whole new style of like indie filmmaking. We just didn't know that was happening, because the thing that we saw was like icebergs, you know, melting, right? But like underneath it was like, you know, a new species of fish was about to emerge. And so I kind of hope that that's what's going on. And I think being nimble as a creative is going to be is just a requirement, you know. Yeah. Like before, it was like I saw so many people who couldn't make, you know, teachers really, who like that I knew as teachers, who couldn't go from like the film to video. It was like anathema to them, you know. And I think that like, well, now it's like, you know, hey, all right, I'll do a Quibi project. Okay, Quibi's gone, cool, I learned something, you know. Like, I think it's just, you have to be ready for whatever it may be, because storytelling is never going to change. The delivery system, you know, may change, but being a good storyteller and knowing how to, like, you know, turn those knobs on something that's 30 seconds, 3 minutes, 30 minutes, 3 hours, 10 episodes, 8 seasons. Like, if you can hone that craft, I think you'll be good.
Yeah. I mean, that's something I actually have to remind myself a lot of, is like, storytelling doesn't change. Mm-hmm. Go back to the classics and like see what's up. One film that I try to get people to watch to like convince them that old movies aren't dumb is The Conformist, because Bartolucci, yeah. Because that film is shot like it was made yesterday. Like big sweeping camera moves. It's in color, thank God. You know, this it's
what was
just
that, like
very
73 or like 7?
I think it was like 68.
68. Okay,
it might be 73. You could be right. Let's do another research. This is maybe the second podcast I've ever just actively done research while we talk about it. But it's surprisingly 1970, so right in the middle. But it feels much more modern than I actually watched that, and then I went and saw The Godfather in theaters for that re-release back to back, and I was like, so these films came out. When was The Godfather? 78.
The Godfather, I think, was 70.
That was also 70.
3.
Maybe that was also 70, and that was my
72.
72. So they came out right next to each other, and The Godfather feels old, quote unquote. And The Conformist doesn't.
Interesting.
And I just found that very fascinating because everyone's willing to say, "Oh, Godfather, best movie of all time." Like, okay, cool. Go watch The Conformist, see what's up, see what the Italians are doing. You know,
right.
But also, so tangent. Have to remind myself that storytelling doesn't change and all stories are good. But also that I need to not go on tangents, so I remember what I was going to say. That's the other thing I need to remember. God damn it. The Gordon Willis thing, speaking of The Godfather, where he said, you should keep things simple, but not simplistic. Don't overcomplicate what you're trying to tell. What's the main point of what you're doing, and keep it simple. Don't dumb it down, but just hone it into the easiest way. I mean, not the easiest, but the most simple way for this to be delivered. We don't need, as you were saying, those Ronin moves and 30 different characters. That was the Jurassic Park problem. 70 characters, no through line. Right. Just a lot of dinosaurs and a lot of, remember the dinosaurs? Hey, do you want a John Williams drop? Here you go. That kind of thing. It's just too much. Just narrow it down. And I'm starting to see, but again, to your point about being hopeful, I do feel like things are starting to move back into that direction. I think there's been enough complaining from both the audience and creatives that that's kind of starting to pivot out.
Right. I hope.
Yeah. Talk to me about your podcast, because I saw it right before we got on that you had one, so I can't say I've listened to it, but that'll go on the old list. But what do you do on there?
So it's called Let's Shoot with Pete Chatmon, and I basically, I rap with folks in front of and behind the camera. The tagline is, we kind of talk about why we'll always need stories. You know what I mean? And we also, for my immediate audience, I try and also get folks to chat about what, from their position, makes a good director. And so, I like to consider it, two people chatting over coffee or a drink or whatever it is they like about the business and their journey, and trying to make sure listeners have some kind of understanding of how they could apply the principles learned from someone else's journey to their own. So, I've had folks that I've worked with, like Issa Rae and Rob McElhenney and Dorian and Simone Missick and Kaylee Cuoco. And then, folks that I've met along the way that are, executives and all that good stuff, writers. So I enjoy it. It's kind of cathartic for me. I started it back during in June of 2020, like when we were locked down and wiping off packages and whatnot. But, I keep it going because I learned something from everybody, and I feel like remaining curious is another important thing for somebody in this industry, because the minute you think you've got it figured out is the minute you'll become obsolete, So I try and better myself while sharing something for other people to hear as well.
That is almost identical to how this podcast started. I think it was like January 2020. Nearly same exact. So basically you have the more polished, higher brow version of this thing. This
Hey,
was the more casual.
I don't know. I mean, it's very casual, man. I try and keep it from, you know, over that time as well. One of my favorite podcasts became Mark Maron's, you know, What the Fuck. And,
oh yeah.
you know, I just love how you just don't know where those conversations are going to go. I don't know if I have 2 to 3 hours, you know, when I get folks. So it's a little, I do have to kind of keep it on.
Well, they're at his house too. They can't get away. He just got them.
But I love it, man. It's very refreshing and rewarding to do it.
Totally. I'll actually steal kind of that question from you then, is what makes a good DP in your head?
What makes a good DP? I think a good, and I won't put this in any order. I'm just going to kind of throw things out at you. I think a good DP has a great connection to emotion. I think a good DP is a great collaborator and communicator, because I think that, you know, and I'm thinking whether film or TV, I think a good DP is going to have so many different types of directors that they work with. And I would argue that collaboration kind of works best when everyone is reimagining themselves to a degree to work with the people that they work with, right? I think that good DP's got to be a technical wizard. You know, like I'm looking to, like, there's always something where I'm like, yo, how are we gonna do that shit? You know, and I need that person to be like, here's how, or I'm gonna do a test and figure it out. But like, you know, they've got to be that technical wizard. And I think they've got to go with the flow. You know, I'm not a fan of anyone, even ADs who are bark, bark, bark. I think obviously, like, we've got to keep things moving and be firm. But, you know, at the end of the day, there's always going to be some problem. So when they arise, you know, how do you present? And I like to work with folks who keep the vibe the same, no matter what's going on. No one should arrive on set and be like, oh, shit's fucked up today, isn't it? Like, you know, right. They should arrive and then somebody be like, oh yeah, like, we're in a little bit of a jam right now. You know what I mean? It should just be even keel. I'm sure I'm leaving something out. You know, I think they should also find themselves. I think every creative person, particularly department heads, should find themselves in the stories they're telling as well, because somehow, like, that collaborative, you know, jumbo of all these people having a point of view is how you have a better shot at avoiding blind spots. You know what I mean? So yeah, that's what I would say.
Yeah. The one thing that we've said a lot on this podcast is, like, it's important to there's technically correct, and that's fine, but then there's, like, emotionally correct, something that feels good, feels correct, you know, and it's not always something you can articulate. And I think that kind of goes to what you're saying about seeing yourself in the character or in the story or something like that, being able to identify what you would do or something that speaks to you, because then that allows you to feel what is correct. You know,
that's a really great point. Yeah, there's a thing that I remember Paul Newman said. There's a difference that he had to learn, where there's good for me, bad for camera, and bad for me, good for camera. And he was making a point of, like, I had to recognize that bad for me, good for camera is an okay thing, you know? And I think that, cause I've come across DPs who are like, oh, well, that won't be perfect if we do it like that. And you will lose, if you go for perfect, you will lose many great moments, many, you know, honest moments, you know?
The humanity of the thing.
The humanity of the thing, yeah.
Yeah, that's a great place to end on. Thank you so much for spending the hour and some change with me, man. That was a lot of fun.
Hey, Kenny, my pleasure, man. This is great. And I hope everybody listens often and appreciates what you're doing, because it's just great to kind of talk honestly and openly about the industry and creative goals and all that good stuff.
I hope so too. They listen as well. Cool, man. Well, definitely we'll have to have you back on next time you got something you want to talk about, or just if you want to keep talking, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Frame and Reference is an Owlbot production. It's produced and edited by me, Kenny McMillan, and distributed by ProVideo Coalition. Our theme song is written and performed by Mark Pelly, and the F&R Mattbox logo was designed by Nate Truax of Truax Branding Company. You can read or watch the podcast you've just heard by going to provideocoalition.com or youtube.com/owlbot, respectively. And as always, thanks for listening.